make sure that that program doesn't contain controversial subjects, and you're not impolite to people.
No, definitely not, Dad. You know me. I'm never, ever controversial or impolite.
Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to Conversations with your lovable, never pisses anyone off, never been banned from Facebook or YouTube, never been sabotaged or censored for politely expressing a difference of opinion. Ex-Muslim host Ina, keeping it non-controversial.
All right, so here we go. Welcome to panel discussion 7. We're going to be talking about the London attacks today, and I have with me Sarah Ager, who is a British Muslim convert, and I have Jason Liggi, who works right around close to where the attacks happened. I thought that they could help provide a valuable perspective. Hi, guys. How are you doing?
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, me too. Thank you for having me back again.
Yeah, Jason was just on panel 5, so some listeners are already familiar with you, Jason. What's your Twitter handle, guys, just in case people want to check you out on Twitter before we move along?
So mine is at Liggi, so that's Liggi.
Mine is Sarah Ager, nice and complicated. Yeah.
So tell me, guys, Jason, you are right there. So were you there on the day of the attack?
No, I wasn't at work on the day, so I was at home. I was working from home on that day, but I was in on the Friday. So it happened on a Wednesday, I think. So I was in 2 days later. Okay.
And did you notice like a big difference in the way the city was after? Like, because I heard so much from people saying the city was cowed into silence and fearful and...
Yeah, I mean, no, not at all. London isn't affected by these things. We are quite good at just getting on with it. I honestly don't think that you would have noticed that anything had happened if you'd come in, even around the area. I suspect maybe there'd be some. I hadn't been up there, but maybe there'd be some BBC crews or something doing some interviews. But I didn't notice any difference. Everything was normal on the tube. I did see a tweet actually that was saying. It was a picture of people on the tube all looking at their phones and all looking all sort of like serious. And it was like, London is reeling from the attack. Everyone's just looking down at their phones. And the person just said, that's literally what the tube looks like every day. And it's true. Like no one talks to each other on the tube. It all looks like that all the time. So no difference really.
Right. So your subway is kind of like ours. Everyone just staring at their phones.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So Sarah, I know you're in Italy, right?
Yes. Yeah, so I got the news on my phone, and I was in the middle of work, so I couldn't really look at any of the news. I just knew that there had been an attack. And obviously, anytime you see news about an attack or a terrorist attack, you have an emotional response. But I think it was particularly strong because it's my home country. I know a lot of people who work in Westminster or near Westminster, so I was very concerned about their safety, and thankfully everyone was fine. I also noticed that tweet about Londoners, and it really struck me because I was in London for the 7/7 attack, which is quite a while ago now, and I remember feeling the same emotion, observing the same thing, that Londoners are incredibly resilient and they just get on with things. I remember the next day, my brother said to me, we have to get onto the tube. It's really important that we go on the tube now because we need to show that we're not going to change our lifestyle for these people. And not only that, I'm going to take you to your first gay bar because the terrorists really won't like that. And so I remember... it was quite interesting. And I remember speaking to Londoners. They are so, they're really great when they're coming together after an event like this. And I'm always very, very impressed by the spirit of Londoners.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. There's that meme, the keep calm and carry on thing. And I know it's a little bit overdone now, but I think it is true. I mean, culturally, this is something that we've had for a long time. Obviously, in the 80s, we had like the IRA terrorist attacks. So I think people were sort of used to that threat. And then even I read some stories not too long ago about Londoners in the Blitz and how people, when the air raid sirens went off, would send their children up to the roof to check that there was actually anything coming, just because they didn't really want to, like, so for example, there was a mother who had like a Sunday roast on and she didn't want to have to leave it.
Wow.
So she wanted to make sure it was she wanted to make sure it was actually a bomb before she bothered leaving her roast, because, you know, and so there was this kind of natural spirit of defiance and just getting on with things that I think that Londoners have, which is great, you know.
Yeah. And I think sadly humans can normalize these things if they become too common, like you're talking about the Blitz. I went to school in Pakistan just for a couple of years as a teenager, and I remember being terrified at the announcement of like bomb blasts or whatever. From my school, we heard bomb blasts sometimes and sirens, and I was like shaken up. And, you know, my schoolmates, my classmates were like, oh, whatever, just another day, da 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 da. Like, they're so used to it. And then when I went back later as an adult, you know, 2 of the workplaces that I worked at, next door, there was bomb blasts. And again, I was really shaken up. But people that, you know, were used to it did not react like that. Even now, my friends from Pakistan tell me, oh, you should come visit. And I'm like, oh, I'm kind of scared. Like, I don't really know how comfortable I am with, well, what's the worst that can happen? Like, you know, if you have to die, you have to die. Or you're going to get what? You're going to get a gun put to your head. So whatever, just give them your phone. And they're so used to it.
Yeah,
it's bizarre.
I think as terrible as it is, like, there's, you know, been quite a few attacks in Europe over the last, well, at least since 2015, maybe 2014. And I think it is starting to get to the point that we are, I don't want to say used to it, but it used to be if there was some sort of news like that, you would have a really, really visceral emotional reaction. And I still get that to a certain degree, but there's also that kind of like, oh no, not again kind of thing. Yeah. And that's a real shame.
That is a shame.
I agree.
I mean, of course, there are attitudes to this kind of thing that are helpful, that unify us, that make us stronger, that, you know, show defiance in the absolute right way. But then there's some attitudes that seek to divide and just like spread hate or score political points in the wake of something like this. I can think of Tommy Robinson, who I've been watching a couple of interviews of since the attack, and he was right there. I think he was right there with Rebel Media, which is...
Well, I heard that he ran there. Oh, you know, he really wanted... He wasn't there at the time, but he got in a taxi and drove there purposefully to speak.
Oh,
so
really
unhelpfully going there. Yeah.
Sounds possible. Yeah, I was under the impression that he was there. I saw that video of him kind of you know, getting angry out just by the bridge. But I mean, I assumed he was already there, but it sounds likely.
Yeah. I mean, I might be wrong, but I heard reports about that.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Right, because there was, okay, so he was like screaming maniacally. He was losing his mind. And he started, in another interview, he's like, you know, oh, ironically, I happened to be there just warning people about the threat of Islam. And it's like, you know, what did he say? Ironically enough, I was there making a video to warn the public about Islam. And it's like, Tommy, that's what you do. Yeah. Like,
it's not much of a coincidence it's not much of a coincidence when that's basically what you spend your time doing.
Right, exactly. And then there was some bystander in the Rebel Media video where he was like, you're very quick to label this a foreign terror attack. And Tommy was like, because my head is not up my ass. Yeah, but it wasn't. It didn't turn out to be a foreign terror attack. It was a British-born convert, right?
Yeah, well, what Tommy says in the video, he's like, you know, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, but it's something in the vein of like, oh, this has been going on for like 1,400 years, and now you like the elites want to let more of them in or something.
Yeah,
it's like you know.
These people are waging a war on us. This has gone on for 1,400 years. This is nothing new. Political leaders want to invite more. And it's like,
exactly.
Who are these people? Who 1,400 years implies like, you know, Muslims, just Muslims in general, right?
Yeah, well, I think there's this thing of trying to, especially like the right at the moment, trying to make out that Muslims are like one block, you know. And the thing is as well that 12.4%, I looked this up, 12.4% of London's population is Muslim. So it's 40% of all Muslims across the UK live in London. So I imagine if there was widespread, you know, sympathy or support for ISIS, you would see like a lot more going on than just this guy, you know, driving his car across Westminster Bridge. Like there's this desire on the right, I think, to try and make out that all Muslims are basically the same. And you see that with the hijabi thing as well. And this photograph of this woman that's been shared around, making out that she's just walking by and not paying attention.
Right. If you just zoom into her face, she looks obviously distressed in that photograph. She's got her hand on her face and, you know, her mouth is turned downwards. I don't know what else they would want from her. Like, they don't know what happened right before this photo or what happened after. And the fact that this poor woman has had to issue a statement explaining herself just because her photo is being misused and presented as something sinister just because she's wearing a hijab, and it is so, so sad. How do you feel about that kind of thing, Sarah, as a person who wears hijab?
The meme arrived really quickly after the event. I think before we knew who it was even, I think. And it scared me because I think in this situation, most people have an instinctive empathy with the victims of an attack, even if you don't like the person.
Yeah.
Generally, if someone has been attacked or been in an accident, you tend to have an instinctive empathy. So what struck me about this image and the tweet and the responses to it were that the hatred and the underlying belief that all Muslims must be inherently evil in some way is so strong amongst this group of people that it overrides their predisposition to feel empathy or to feel compassion when they see someone in that circumstance. And that scared me because I thought, you know, that means they're not in the process of dehumanizing Muslims. It's already done. It's already complete for them. If they don't feel any emotion whatsoever, or if they willfully ignore that in order to present this image of a hijab, woman in a hijab, it was really disturbing for me to see that. And again, when there's a terrorist attack, you don't expect the conversation to turn to hijab.
Right. What does that have to do
for
with
the umpteenth time? And then there was the comments that I had on Twitter began, and they were talking about hijab. And I thought, why are you speaking about this in particular when we should be talking about, you know, the victims, perhaps the motivation of the attacker, if it is related to Islamic terrorism, etc., not what someone is wearing. So that shocked me.
Did you get any direct comments directly at you?
I had some. I had people saying to me, you know, you're a Muslim, so why do these things happen? And obviously I don't have a satisfactory answer to that.
Well, yeah, you're not responsible for every Muslim.
Yeah, exactly. And I would have conversations with people, but at the end of the conversation, a lot of these people would say to me, well, it's all well and good what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of what you say, but I can't trust you because you wear a hijab.
Oh, dear. So
something in my logic must be impaired, you know, that I can't have a proper debate with someone because I wear this hijab. That was very strange. The fact that it becomes the main focus.
I think we're seeing that, though. We're seeing this retreat into identity and seeing people as groups. So, you know, because you wear a hijab, you're a Muslim. So therefore, like, the Muslims, in quotes, this is what they think. They agree with X, Y, and Z, and they disagree with X, Y, and Z. And, you know, we saw Donald Trump Jr. share this article quoting Sadiq Khan, saying that basically terrorist attacks are part and parcel of living in a major city. And obviously his implication is that he doesn't care and just thinks we should just deal with it, and that's just a problem that we have to deal with. Whereas I think obviously what he was saying is the threat of terrorist attacks in major cities is very common, and it's something that he needs to deal with as mayor. But just the fact that people were sharing that, and especially Donald Trump Jr. as well, I mean, it's an obvious marker that people were starting to think more in terms of, if you are a Muslim, then this is who you are and this is what group you are part of.
Right.
You know?
Wasn't even the very next line of that article something that expanded on that perspective? Like, and we can't let them scare us, like that Sadiq Khan said, something like that, following up that sentiment?
I think he was speaking about the threat of terrorist attacks is something that we have to be prepared for.
Right.
And I think a lot of the comments that I read and that were directed at me were saying that he was sort of resigned to it, or that he didn't care that there were terrorist attacks or the threat of terrorist attacks. Whereas I think he was emphasizing the importance of being prepared for them, and combating them as a society coming together. So in the article was actually quite interesting. The original article, I think it was in September 2016. But obviously sharing it on the day, out of context perhaps, it became the topic of conversation. And it overshadowed Sadiq Khan's speech on that day.
Yeah.
His response was quite interesting because he was interviewed about it and he said, well, look, I don't have time to comment on this because I have other things I need to be doing, and rightly so. I mean, he shouldn't be responding to Twitter commentary. Yeah, exactly
Right.
at the highest level.
Yeah, isn't he the guy though, Donald Trump Jr., that started off that Skittles thing, right?
Oh, did he?
Yes. Was that him? Yeah,
I think it might have been.
That was awful.
Yeah. He's not a smart guy, I don't think. But Sarah, back to this kind of commentary on hijab, even just generally outside of specific terror attacks. You must know that I am a critic of Islamic modesty rules and stuff like that, right? But I, at the same time, see a lot of people doing it in very distasteful ways, which I find very, very counterproductive. So firstly, how do you feel about criticism of hijab generally? Because I'm a critic of the hijab.
Yes. A lot of it is fair, to be honest. I mean, I wear hijab. I enjoy wearing hijab. But I recognize that it can be problematic. And the fact that I wear it, especially as a convert, can be problematic in the sense that by wearing it, am I encouraging the idea that the only way to be a Muslim woman is to wear a hijab? And I recognize that. I also think as a white person, as a British woman, am I just dressing up? Am I appropriating this symbol that, what am I doing wearing it?
Yeah.
And so sometimes I look in the mirror and I have these questions. In the end, I always continue wearing it because I enjoy wearing it. And I feel that it benefits me far more than the disadvantages.
How does it benefit you, if I can ask?
Sure, of course. I feel very confident when I'm wearing it. I feel very... I do like, and I know that this will get criticism, but I do like being visibly Muslim in a non-Muslim country, in Italy in particular. And I know that can be problematic because that then suggests that Muslim women who don't wear hijab are not necessarily recognized as Muslim. So I know that can be a problem. But I also know that in Italy, when I'm walking in the street, I no longer get people saying ciao bella to me.
Oh, really?
Which I used to get harassed a lot. And it's not like I'm a model or an incredibly glamorous woman or anything like that. Just, you could be walking around in a tracksuit and Italian men will just come on to you and invite you to dinner. And I quite enjoy not having that. I know that if I were in a Muslim majority country, the harassment would be there, whether I wear hijab or not.
Right. I think the harassment would be way worse.
And, sometimes I do get Muslim men in Italy saying the whole mashallah,
oh dear.
Hello. And that's really creepy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen very often. So, and also I have really interesting conversations with people because it's so obvious that I'm Muslim because people associate hijab with Islam, that I have very interesting conversations with, for example, my students who like to ask me questions about Islam. And when there's a terrorist attack or something like this, they like to ask my opinion. And I try to be as honest as I can and not trying to present this amazing rose-tinted view of Islam, like everything's great, all Muslims are amazing and we all do amazing things. I try to be as honest as I can. And I tend to find that atheist students that I have appreciate being able to speak to me about it, because they're not able to have those discussions with, for example, fellow Catholics, or they don't know any other Muslims who they can speak to about it. So various reasons.
Right. I think that could be helpful if you have a lot of questions and you know a hijabi that's open to answering them. I think that really helps kind of erase some of the differences and fears that people might feel.
I was just going to say, I thought it was really interesting what you said about really enjoying being visibly Muslim, because I think that is something we're seeing at the moment. What was that symbol, that was used in the Women's March, with the woman in the American flag hijab, and that became that became a big sort of symbol of defiance, and I'm kind of caught in between 2 points of view on it, because I understand that symbolism and that defiance, and I can see how people would want to be more visibly Muslim in the face of discrimination, from Donald Trump and stuff like that. So I understand that, but then I also worry about the sort of glorification of the modesty thing. So it's kind of, I haven't quite worked out where I've settled on that question yet, but I just thought it was really interesting that you said that, and I think I do understand where you're coming from, definitely.
I don't know where I stand on this issue either, to be honest. When it comes to flags on hijabs, I find it a bit icky, really. Yeah. Because I think hijab is already being politicized by Muslims themselves, by people who aren't Muslim. And then on top of that, you add a flag, or in the UK, a poppy. And it becomes, you have multiple narratives going on at the same time and arguments, and they all converge on Muslim women's bodies. And it really, so I just don't know what to make of it. So I wouldn't wear a British flag on my hijab, because I don't see the point.
Would you wear it on your jacket?
I might wear a t-shirt.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I have one actually, and I wouldn't have a problem doing that. But just combining it with the hijab, I don't know. I don't know what I'm achieving really by doing that. Am I, trying to prove that I'm British?
I think it can
odd.
Be useful to express that you can have these multiple identities simultaneously, which many bigots on either side think you can't have.
Yes.
A lot of Muslim bigots will be like, well, no, you have to pledge allegiance to Islam and Islam only, and you're a Muslim first and everything else comes after. And, nationalist bigots are like, well, no, you have to be British or you have to be American and American only. I had a guy tell me that the other day on Twitter, that people like me should never be allowed to work for the government because I reap the benefits of countries like Canada. Meanwhile, I still call myself a Pakistani Canadian.
Wow.
So people who have such strong ties to Pakistan are not trustworthy.
So that's terrible,
incredible.
Isn't it? Yeah, we are seeing this just, like I said, this increasing prevalence of identity, whether it's religious or national, and I do wonder why that is. I think maybe it's something to do with insecurity. I think people are feeling insecure in themselves because of all the people are trying to find causes for things. So it's either, alt-right nationalism, or it's like Islamism and stuff like that. There's all of these things seem to be on the rise.
I think it's because we are melding together as a world that grows smaller and smaller each day by the internet. We're so connected with each other in different parts of the globe that our differences in our identities are fading. And I think that threatens the most extreme versions of us in each culture. And they try to cling to that more and more loudly.
Well, it's reactionary, isn't it? I think it was Tom Holland, the historian on Twitter, said that Sadiq Khan basically represents everything that ISIS is most terrified of and most hates. He's like a liberal Muslim who is, important in the government in the UK. He's everything that they don't want to exist. And I think that's true. I think that the people, you're right. It is this rise of this nationalism and this, fervent, religious identity, I think, is reactionary against the fact that we are melding together and these borders are breaking down, and like culturally, religiously, all of these things, we're becoming more of like a single group that can all get along together. And people who take refuge in their identity quite strongly don't like it. They feel like it's eroding it.
So back to the hijab thing for a second. Sarah, do you kind of wear it for more identity reasons or for modesty reasons?
A bit of both, I suppose.
Okay.
The problem with wearing it for modesty reasons is you're then suggesting that people who aren't wearing it are immodest.
Exactly.
Which is a problem, because I cover up, I wear relatively loose-fitting clothes apart from leggings, and I wear hijab. So it's partly identity. It's partly when I converted, I started wearing hijab as a sort of experiment, if you will, to see if I liked it, and it was part of the process of converting for me, in a way, this idea of hijab physically and spiritually. So the two became combined. Now, if I had converted and I hadn't started wearing hijab at a similar time, maybe I would think differently. Maybe I wouldn't find it so comforting wearing a hijab. I don't know. It's possible. It's possible.
But you don't, do you feel that it's right for women to hide their hair? Otherwise men will be provoked into lusting after them?
I think it's right for me. I think I enjoy wearing it and I like wearing it. I don't think it's right for necessarily other people. And I would certainly never tell people that they had to. I mean, my family are mostly Christian or atheist. And when I'm out shopping with my mum and she's buying clothes, I'm never saying, "Oh, mother, please cover your legs, cover your arms." Because she feels confident when she's wearing whatever clothes she's wearing. And I would never want to stop someone else from wearing what they want. So I don't view it in that way, but I can, I understand how people could speak to me and say, "Well, that's Sarah, she's just all over the place. She doesn't really make any sense." I accept that because I know that my views can be contradictory, and they're all things that I'm working out in my own.
Well, that's great. I think
my own head.
That's so helpful to say honestly, because there will be so many people that are trying to be liberal and trying to be religious at the same time, and they are very, very contradictory, but they won't acknowledge that, and then that makes people really upset at them for being dishonest. But I think if you just acknowledge it up front and say, "I'm just trying to work this stuff out in my head right now," I think that's a great way to tackle it. It's fair. It's fair that you're figuring it out. I don't necessarily agree with you, but I absolutely support your right to wear one. And I get really mad at people who take this idea of criticizing hijab intellectually and turn it into demonizing hijabis as people. It's such a kind of fine line you have to walk, right? It's becoming increasingly harder and harder. I'll see my critiques, being retweeted by people with Trump in their profile picture, and I'm like, no. So I don't, it's very hard.
I think that you have to have your standard of being honest and being open, and recognize that some people are going to use your words in a negative way. But I think it's better that you're open and honest about your criticism, etc. And even if it is used in a negative way, I think people appreciate that honesty, that honest critique. Because often I've noticed in your tweets that you'll say something and maybe someone underneath will then say something, take it further and make it generalized or make it bigoted, and you'll step in and say, whoa, that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You have to have balance. So And I appreciate that as well, because obviously I don't always agree with the things that you say, but I appreciate the fact that you try to have this balance and you're coming at it from a different angle. And you have experience that I don't have, and that informs my opinions. I often see things that you write, and it may either changes my opinion or it gives me some kind of counter argument to something that maybe I hadn't questioned before.
Yeah, I think in that sense, it's always good to see views that you don't agree with, because they can make you rethink your own, or they can strengthen your own, because you try to justify what the other person is saying in your head, and you work out a more fine-tuned argument to rebut that. But I do, at the same time, I do think it's important to try and normalize hijabis as people in our society. Meanwhile, I want to remain critical of hijab as a concept, or any modesty concept, really. If purity balls in Texas were, being promoted as the new feminism, I'd be completely annoyed and angry about that and criticizing that too. Or if Amish clothing was being promoted as the new feminist symbol of defiance or empowerment, then I'd be against that too. But it just so happens that it's hijab these days is all the rage for, and I understand also the reasons for using it as a symbol of defiance. It is definitely becoming a symbol of defiance the more the right pushes against hijabis, or more like hate crimes that happen against hijabis. But it's not a symbol of empowerment or feminism. I can't square that.
Actually, I've been contacted several times over the last year or so, and in fact, this week after the attack on Wednesday in London, I was contacted by someone who wanted to know my opinion. She felt very strongly that she wanted to wear hijab as an act of defiance. She's Muslim. She doesn't wear hijab, and I've also been contacted by women who are not Muslim who want to wear hijab as a sort of protest. And my answer to them always is, well, what do you think this will achieve? And I often it might make them feel better. And I do appreciate them wanting to show solidarity. But then I also say, well, this might actually cause more problems than it helps. Yeah, in a way. Yeah. So I think, and then often they go away and they're a bit disappointed because I wasn't so enthusiastic about encouraging them to wear it. And several years ago, I would have been pro this. I'm sure I would have been supporting people wearing hijab as sort of to show people, yeah, okay, you can wear hijab and you have the freedom to wear hijab, etc. Nowadays, I don't have that opinion. It's interesting how our opinions evolve over time. But someone whose opinions have not evolved over time, or maybe have devolved, is Tommy Robinson. I hate to keep going back to him, but it's so true that Britain does have an extremism problem. And I think that he does a great disservice, and people like him, when they take it so far into generalizing Muslims and saying bigoted things that they make it harder to address real issues. So he was on another interview after this attack saying, we're very fortunate in the UK. We don't have a far right, really. We just have normal people like me.
Yeah.
Tommy.
I guess you can't see the far right if you are the far right, I guess.
No.
Right. The rebel media guy and Tommy screaming at liberals or whatever, saying the blood is on your hands, and this is a foreign attack. You import a culture, you're going to get a terrorist culture, things like that. It was all bullshit, because the guy ended up being someone who was born in Britain and radicalized in Britain. Now, the thing is, you have to acknowledge that this is a local problem as well, right? If you want to address it. Things like people being radicalized in prisons and stuff is so complex and so complicated seeming. How do you even begin to tackle that? I don't know. Yeah,
it's a difficult problem. With this guy, Khalid Massoud, so far they've said that they don't actually know what his motive was. It certainly looks like the MO of ISIS, doesn't it? Using a car to mow down pedestrians.
They also kind of claimed it, didn't it? That they inspired him?
Yeah, they did, but I imagine they would regardless. Yeah. But I think more likely than not, I'm sure it was ISIS related. I think he probably was more self-radicalized. I don't think there's really any evidence. But I know there was something to do with him checking his WhatsApp shortly before. So now the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, is talking about, people shouldn't be allowed to have encrypted WhatsApp messages because we need it to be able to protect the people, which is slightly concerning. But Tommy said a few things in that interview. So there was the interview where he was kind of yelling and screaming outside Westminster Bridge, and then there was another interview he did shortly after that on the same subject. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this one.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Okay, right. But he says, he's talking about, 66% of British Muslims said they wouldn't report someone to the police for being involved in terrorism, or, British Muslims who've gone to Syria have come back into the country without being arrested, and all of these sorts of things.
Yeah, and the thing that Tommy specializes in is making it seem reasonable, mixing just the right amount of fact with a whole bunch of bullshit so that you kind of buy into what he's saying. And
I was watching the interview, and kind of for the first maybe not quite 10 minutes, but for a fair bit of it, I was kind of like, okay, he hasn't said anything too crazy yet. I'm kind of, I'm on board with vaguely what he's saying. It sounds, maybe slightly more angry than I would prefer. But then he goes and says something like, I think he's talking, and then he says, the refugee crisis, and he's like, well, they call it the refugee crisis, but it's actually an Islamic invasion. And it's just like, okay, you lost me. Every single refugee is part of an invading army. Is that what you're saying, Tommy? And I think I don't know if he believes that. Maybe he does. And he says something like that, hundreds of thousands of Muslims raping their way across Europe or something. It's like, oh, Jesus. Come on. He does. He has this insidious mix of sounding reasonable and saying things that aren't too far off the mark. He likes to quote the Quran, and he says how he's read a lot about Islam.
Right, and he knows the Quran. He can quote some things pretty accurately. But, all these Abrahamic scriptures especially have such violent, misogynistic things in them. You don't hold Christians by that standard. Doesn't the Bible say to kill your kids if they take you away from God or something?
Yeah, there's
quite a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff in the Bible too, for sure. I think when it comes to Islam, there are verses in the Quran that can seemingly look like they're promoting attacking disbelievers and stuff. There's a famous verse.
They don't just look like it. They
are. They are. Yeah, for sure. But the thing that a lot of moderate Muslims would say is that was revealed during a time where Muslims were being oppressed, and it's talking about a specific set of disbelievers that the Muslims were allowed to attack. And I think the problem is that the modern sort of so ISIS, this is something that I think people don't realize, but ISIS is the fringe of the fringe of the fringe, right? So Salafis,
they were too extreme for Al-Qaeda, I remember.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have Salafism, right? Salafism is kind of the regressive, hardcore form of Islam, and then the fringe of that is kind of the jihadist version, so Salafi jihadists who are like Al-Qaeda, and then you have ISIS, who Al-Qaeda considers too extreme. So when people are making out that this is the mainstream Muslim position, they're 3 levels of fringe down, and I think that is something that a lot of people don't realize.
Well, also, most modern day, especially Western Muslims, they cherry pick like any other theist trying to exist in the 21st century. Muslims don't have this, miraculous Quran chip implanted in their brains where they're going to automatically follow every single verse that is I tell you, my distant family and my cousin, and nobody even knows what the bloody scripture says. Every time I quote something at them when I'm annoyed, because they're being apologists, they're like, whoa, it doesn't really say that. And I'm like, God, nobody knows the damn thing they're defending. It's so frustrating.
Well, the dangerous people are the ones who use these holy books as a literal instruction manual. So they read something, a verse that was revealed during a time where Muslims were at war, and they say, well, it says strike the necks of the disbelievers, so I'm going to go out right now and find someone who doesn't believe, and I'm going to hit them with a machete or whatever. It's like, okay, well, calm down. I don't think that's how most Muslims look at their holy book, just like most Christians don't. I mean, like you said, there's verses in the Bible that say if your brother or your mother try to lead you away from God, then you should put them to death immediately on the spot. And I don't think many people do that, because I think you would hear about it.
Right. The thing is that people are going to get really upset because they're going to be like, oh, well, it's a false equivalence and Islam is so much worse than Christianity and nobody acts on this stuff in Christianity anymore, while people in Islam act on this stuff all the time. And it's true. It's true. I'm not equating them. Christianity is a lot older. It's had time to soften, more time than Islam. And I think what we're seeing now is Islam, and it's like kind of last throes of clinging on to this ancient form of it. And as it adjusts to modernity, it will become more watered down, more personalized. So you got to give Muslims that same chance. Many of them cherry pick just the same way. And of course, that's not, I don't consider it to be intellectually honest or, completely consistent. But I mean, I can't say that I consider religion to be really consistent. So I'm sorry, Sarah.
No, there's so many things I could say about this, because I used to be Christian. So
were you a religious Christian?
Yes, my parents are ministers.
Oh, okay.
All on my mum's line, they're all ministers. So
wow.
I thought at one point that I might even become a minister myself. So I have a lot of experience when it comes to cherry picking, because I was so used to it as a Christian and didn't question it. But the thing about Christianity is they have a really handy get out clause. When there's something bad in the Old Testament, where God says kill these people, they can just say, yeah, but then Jesus came and then he said don't do that, so it's fine.
But he also said abide by all the stuff in the Old Testament.
Was it not one jot or tittle of my word will pass away until something. See, this is my Christian expertise coming out. I haven't even read the Bible. So. I've read the Quran. I haven't read the Bible.
Yeah, and I think you're right as well. I can't remember who said it, but one of you said that a lot of Christians haven't read all of the things in the Bible, because when we have Bible readings in church, the minister chooses which ones we read, and a lot of people don't read them. They certainly don't read the law books, which say, if you combine two threads together, you should be killed, for example. And I think with the Quran, I think the difficulty is that I think there are more Muslims who take it literally than there are Christians.
That's the problem.
And for me, the thing that I find strange is that people say to me, well, you're not really Muslim because firstly, you're nice. And secondly, they'll say, well, you're not really Muslim because you're not following all of the Quran. And I say, well, if you try to follow all of the Quran 100%, you can't, because you can't both kill someone and be compassionate at the same time.
It's contradictory to itself, so you can't.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think there are religious texts that aren't contradictory. And so you have to read it and you have to apply your own sense of right and wrong. Whether you believe that comes from God is another question, or whether you think that's your innate humanity coming through, that's another matter entirely. And you have to apply common sense to it, and you have to think, who is this literally the word of God, or is this a person who wrote it down because they were inspired by God?
You can be literalist as well, and not, there are ways to be literalist that aren't quite as bad as ISIS. So, for example, you could believe that, the Quran was revealed literally to Muhammad, and it literally meant what it did at the time in the context that he was reading it, but it isn't an instruction manual for 2017 for a Muslim living in modern London to read it and say, I'll go out and do that. You can say, this is the book that God revealed to the Muslims in the 7th century. That's a possible literalist you could be without being,
Well, if you're looking for loopholes out, you'll find loopholes out of being violent and all of that. But if you're looking for, raw material to justify your violence, to justify your hatred, you will find that too. And that's the problem. The problem is that we have too many, way worse than Westboro Baptist Church Muslims. And that doesn't...
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Although I would say that I don't think it's quite as simple as they, have violent tendencies, or they want to be violent and they look to the Quran and they find some stuff and they're like, hey, I want to be violent. I think...
No, I don't think it's as conscious a decision as that. There's just people that go down that route and their belief seems to confirm everything that they are... feeling.
You can be attracted towards a more, radical version, and young people generally are. That's why most jihadists. I mean, this guy was an outlier in the fact that he was 52 and he was quite a lot older than most jihadists are. And the reason is because young people are attracted to radical ideologies. I think it was Scott Atran said something like, when he was talking to someone who was trying to come up with a program to lead people away from radical Islam, and they were talking about, we just have to push moderate Islam, and he was like, when have you ever heard of someone young giving up something radical in favor of something moderate?
Right. It just doesn't come across as interesting or seductive.
Young people are natural radicals. I mean, you see that in universities at the moment with the the social justice thing, and even the pushback to that, the alt-right is led by young people.
Right. I mean, I was pretty radical in my own way in university. Like, I dressed with dog collars, and was nothing like jihadism, but I was coming from Saudi.
Of it, though.
Exactly. Like, coming from the land of burqas and finally getting to dress how you want, you kind of just go nuts a little bit, right? You want to get tattoos, you want to get piercings. That was my being radical, and a lot of people did find it disturbing in my family.
I do think, though, that, jihadists aren't purely motivated by their own sort of selfish desire to cause violence. I think they do come to really believe in something like jihad. They do come to believe in the righteousness of using terrorism against the West, and it's this kind of loop of believing these things, and then that feeding into your sort of personal self-righteous anger, and then that feeding back into reading the text in that way, and you just get worse and worse, and you go down this rabbit hole. And so I think it's really complicated. It's way more complicated than most people want to give it credit for.
Right. Most people want to either deny it has anything to do with ideology, or they want to say that Muslims are innately ideological robots that don't stray at all or cherry pick at all. So it's either everything to do with Islam or nothing to do with Islam. And really, it's not either of those simple answers. It's, absolutely. I think ideology is a huge factor in denying that. It's completely unhelpful. And Islam is not a monolith, so people don't need to feel defensive. Like, I understand the desire to say, no, this has nothing to do with me. I'm Muslim, and this is not representative of my Islam. But you can't deny that is also a form of Islam any more than they can deny that your moderate form of Islam is a form of Islam. You know what I mean? That's why I hate these not real Muslim, not real Islam kind of excuses, because you don't get to decide what Islam is. How someone else practices it is Islam to them.
Well, that's one of the worst reactions, I think, to this is to just shut down and say terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. They aren't true Muslims. I mean, I think it was John Kerry said he called ISIS apostates or something, which was just like, oh God, why would you use that term?
It's the worst, Why are you demonizing fucking apostates, first of all?
And the problem is that there are going to be people who don't understand this stuff much. They don't really know what's going on. And then they hear the left saying, this is nothing to do with Islam. This is, just terrorism, has no religion, and blah, blah, blah. And then they hear Tommy Robinson saying, well, this attacker, before he went, he said this part from the Quran, and he shouted Allah Akbar, and blah. And they go, oh, maybe this Tommy Robinson guy's, he maybe he's onto something. And that's where you have that worry. That's the reason. And I understand what people are trying to do when they say it's nothing to do with Islam. What they're saying is this is not the Islam that I know. This is not
right,
what...
but they're not helping at all.
No, well, they're throwing fuel on the right wing because Sam Harris has the quote from a long time ago, which he got a lot of shtick for, which was, if we can't speak sensibly about the problems of Islam, I think he would say Islamism now, then the right wing is going to be the only people that do. And I think that was quite prescient. We've come to see that happen.
Yeah. I still think there's time for the left to start speaking and addressing this in a liberal manner, and not to give people a chance to do it in a bigoted manner. That's what I try to do with my show.
There are ways to do it as well. I said earlier that ISIS are fringe, and they're the fringe of the fringe of the fringe squared. There are ways to talk about how unrepresentative of normal Muslims they are without pretending that it's nothing to do with Islam.
Right.
It's not even difficult.
You actually sent me a clip from this old BBC dude who just put it so beautifully. He gave me chills, sort of. I think you retweeted it too, Sarah. It was I don't know what his name is.
I want to say Neil, but I could just be guessing.
I think that might be a second name, but I'm not actually sure.
Andrew Neil.
I should probably know that, being British. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of fire for that.
Shame on you guys. But yeah, he did it really well. He kind of, said fuck you to the Islamists without kind of mincing the words that it was Islamism and the radical religious attacks or whatever. But then he kind of took Muslims in, he took people of every faith, every color, and said, we are all part of the solution. We can do this together. And you don't scare us. So
he
that's
said some great phrases in there, he said jihadi Johnny, which I thought was hilarious. Yeah. And he called him a Poundland terrorist as well, which I thought was great. Poundland
is kind of like your dollar store, right? I'm guessing?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty funny. So yeah, I think that's what we have to come together as humanity, not Muslims versus non-Muslims. It's everybody against terrorists. And the more that Muslims get defensive about it, they do not get grouped in with the people who are opposing terrorism, because they get so defensive. They don't want to admit that it has anything to do with ideology. They, instead they try to say things like Islam is, the religion of peace, and it's never called for people hurting anyone. And what do you think of that, Sarah?
We've come to the point where there's sort of a cycle of reactions, and the first reaction is defense, just immediate defense, saying it's nothing to do with Islam at all, or they're not real Muslims, and that makes me very uncomfortable, because I don't want to be in the same group as a terrorist. Yeah. No way. However, if other Muslims can say, well, they're not real Muslims, then what's stopping other Muslims from saying, well, Sarah, you're, pro-LGBT, you're liberal, you want secularism, etc. You're not a real Muslim.
Right.
Or saying that other sects within Islam are not real Muslims, or that they're apostates, and that somehow leaving the religion is a bad thing. You leave the religion and therefore you must have an agenda, a vendetta against that religion. Yeah. And again, because I left a religion, I would be a hypocrite if I said, oh, well, you can leave Christianity because I did, but you can't leave Islam because...
Right. I see that
I have to be consistent.
Your pinned tweet
I want to be consistent.
Is in support of ex-Muslims, and I think that as a visibly religious Muslim, that's a really beautiful thing. I wish that more religious Muslims would show that kind of support to ex-Muslims, then there wouldn't be this kind of constant tension between us. Right now, it seems like
everyone would relax.
Right. If Muslims can come out in support of apostates, just in masses. That would be so wonderful. It just doesn't happen.
I think you can
Not yet.
You can understand that people are afraid. I think that both of the reactions are a result of fear. They're a result of lack of control. I think people are scared of jihadism, and then ordinary Muslims are scared of being branded as part of jihadism.
Yeah.
We're now in a situation where you can be walking around like any city in Europe and you can suddenly find yourself like being shot at by terrorists or run over by some nutcase. And, it's side too. I mean, the hate crimes are on the rise, and that's terrifying for both sides. You're scared of being attacked by jihadists, and then ordinary Muslims are scared of being attacked by the far right, and it's just kind of this cycle of like reflexive defense and clinging tighter to your existing group and your identity, protecting the status quo, and again looking around for like easy answers because it feels like you can do something. The more afraid people are, and the longer the problem goes on, people just start looking to the more radical answers. Like on the right, you see like ban Muslim immigrants, deport all the Muslims, form an ethno-state and deport all non-whites, and all of these sort of things. And one of the problems as well is that the left wing has trouble with this because it's a problem that doesn't really have an easy solution or really any solution. Like, how do we stop someone from just getting in their car and running down a bunch of people in the street? Like, how do you predict that? How do you stop it?
Yeah, how do you predict that?
So I think, people start to get sick of hearing we have to be strong and resilient. We can't let them divide us. As much as that is a great spirit, people want action and they want something to be done, and then they turn to someone like Donald Trump who says, I've got the solution, when
but do you
obviously
think
he doesn't.
Donald Trump's solutions don't work, right? You can't just like if you keep out Muslims, the new ones coming in or traveling, how is that going to help anything? There's already a lot of Muslims here. There's always exactly, and there's always a possibility of someone converting, like Sarah. Sorry.
But I mean, this is the thing, right? Even the most radical solution that these crazy like Richard Spencer types come up with, which is forming a white ethno-state, right?
How do you unentangle the races from one another when we've already had kids with one another? What do you do?
That. And also, there are 3.3 million Muslims in America, right? And 30% of them are white. So even if you deported all the non-whites, you'd still have 1 million Muslims. And then, so what, do they want it to be ethnically homogenous and then also culturally and religiously? So like what, then you're basically just like North Korea.
Am I right in thinking as well that the majority of Muslims in America are African-American as well? I
think there's a very high proportion.
I'm not sure. And I think they've been there for a long, long time. And, it's really a society that has integrated for many, many generations.
Yeah, well, America has great integration. They don't have nearly as much of an extremism problem as we do in like the UK or in France or in some parts of Europe. They seem to have really nailed it. I mean, you get some real outliers like, the San Bernardino attacks or the Orlando shooter, but they are kind of like, they're rare. There's not much of an extremism problem in the US from what I've seen anyway.
Yeah, in North America generally, I don't think we have those like Islamic ghettos kind of. American Muslims tend to feel more part of the general fabric of society than I think, from what I see, extreme British Muslims. You guys have more like British Islam is something that is such a mystery to me. And I hate to generalize like British Islam. I'm sure there's a variety of types of British Muslim as well. But the kinds of extreme Islam I've seen coming from Britain, I haven't actually even seen in Saudi Arabia with my own eyes, because I felt like in Saudi, people did not have this insecurity of wanting to cling to their Muslim identity. So everyone was really lax about it. There was no desperation to prove anything or show how Muslim you are back when I was there. And when we had family friends visit from the UK, they were like aliens because they would be really extreme. And us, like kids that grew up in Saudi, found it very, very strange. Like, whoa, we had heard Britain was like a pretty liberal, place. So, well, what is up with these Muslim visitors that we're getting? We got some family friends visiting us, and there was a girl who refused to like even touch women. Like, if someone wanted to give her a hug, She was like, no, you know?
What, she was female and she didn't want to touch other women.
Yeah.
Is that even a thing?
No,
in
it's
Islam?
not. It's not.
No.
No.
I've never heard of that.
But she has gone one step ahead.
Really bizarre.
So, yeah.
I've known plenty of people, Muslims in the UK, who we had a guy come in for an interview at one of my first jobs who the interviewer was female. He didn't want to shake her hand and stuff. And I mean, he was like perfectly normal, nice guy other than that. It was just obviously there was that conservative sort of strain. And I lived in High Wycombe for a while, which has got quite a large sort of Muslim population, quite conservative as well. So you see like a lot of burqas and that sort of thing. But I mean, it was...
You see like the full face veil burqas?
Oh, yeah, like everything, like full body. Everything.
Oh, dear, yeah. We don't see too many of those in Toronto, but...
What's really interesting is that you said British Islam is a complete mystery to you. And in all honesty, it is to me as well, in many ways, because I haven't been a Muslim in the UK. I'm in Italy. I'm completely isolated from it. I don't think I've ever seen a woman in a niqab or a burqa in Italy. I don't think. I mean, they must exist, but I don't think I've ever seen someone wearing one. And so when I go back to the UK, I don't really have any experience of British Islam. I've never been to a British mosque. So in many ways, you actually probably have more experience than I do in many ways, because you live with British Muslims and I don't.
I wonder if, because I know a lot of the British Muslim immigrant population comes from Pakistan, and I know that in Pakistan there's quite like a lot of extremism, or is a growing extremism. It's growing,
yeah.
So I wonder if that's kind of imported, or I'm not sure.
It's also they've become more religious than their parents' generation, right? I'm pretty sure I've read stats on that, which is very strange. Also, I think the kinds of populations that immigrated to North America and to Britain were very different. I think the levels of education and income and all of that made a big difference. I think in England, there was a concentration from specific regions of Pakistan. And I think in North America, they're more diverse.
Maybe, but it doesn't really surprise me because as someone who's, when I first came to Italy, I remember that I became a lot more stereotypically British because I was holding on to that aspect of me. And also I was hanging on to religion as well. I'd recently converted and I was very zealous because I'd sort of just converted, and you have that enthusiasm and then it kind of dies down. And I feel like maybe with the next generation and several generations, they'll just calm down.
But what made them go reverse of their parents, I wonder, right? There's also a large far-right presence, whatever Tommy Robinson of the EDL says or not. You guys have a much stronger far-right than we do in North America, in Europe. And I think that kind of clash causes more reactionary...
Well, our far right in the UK is not too bad. I mean, Tommy Robinson is basically one of the only real bad people, and then you've got Katie Hopkins, but most of them are kind of like figures rather than politicians. We have Nigel Farage, who's no one here takes him that seriously. I know he sounds quite a big
pretty
effect.
Important. I just read in a Nick Cohen article today, he's talking about how he's connected to Donald Trump and so it's not like he's a nobody. He still has influence.
It's hard to judge, really, because on the one hand, I tend to think, who is this guy? He doesn't have any influence. He still hasn't been elected as an MP after I don't know how many decades. And then on the other hand, he does have influence, and he is part of the conversation about the far right and about immigration, etc., and Brexit even. So it's hard to know, is he important or is he, is he a nobody? It's really difficult to tell because many people, as you say, don't take him seriously.
Yeah. There's a great difference. Just to run back quickly to the integration thing with North America. There's a great illustration, and maybe don't quote me 100% on this, but I'm pretty sure it's right. That in the US, Muslims have a higher support for gay marriage than Christians or evangelical Christians, and in the UK, tolerance for homosexuality among British Muslims is something like near to 0%. So I mean,
yeah, I've seen something similar.
Yeah, so there's quite a wide gulf there in attitudes. I think that's kind of a good measuring stick.
So how do we tackle that? Like, how do people in general start to tackle this radicalization or extremism problem that is starting to emerge? Even now in Canada, it's starting to be more visible as people, you know, fight against things like My Children's Book in schools, or, you know, they want to have more faith schools, or I think the San Bernardino woman was radicalized at a place called Al Huda, I think, which started by a Pakistani immigrant to Canada, I think. That's like a crazy culty place. Like, it's horrendous. I've known people that have been lost to that cult, right? And they've become totally fucked up trying to preach to their parents and getting really like sort of obsessive to a point where it affects their parenting skills, and they lose friendships, and they can't even think of time outside of religion. Like, so you say, okay, you've invited us for dinner, what time would you like us to come over? Oh, after Isha prayers. And it's like, well, when the fuck is that? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's very strange when people become so immersed in a cult. Like, you know, many Christian cults exist, but I don't think Islamic cults have been as explored. And I think Al Huda is very normalized.
It's a question that I'm also ask. I don't know. Like, I think we need to have this discussion honestly about Islamic extremism in Britain and across Europe, and how it's being tackled, and what ordinary people can do, including Muslims, obviously, and how we can help integration and weed out extremism. But I mean, we have to make sure we don't make ordinary Muslims feel like they're, you know, being blocked in with extremism and just, you know, feel like they're all being tarred with the same brush. But I don't know the answer. I'm not sure how to even begin to tackle the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated, and it's so delicate a balance to acknowledge that it can be rooted in religion, and to also make sure Muslims feel like they are part of the solution, not part of the problem. Because to alienate all Muslims is definitely counterproductive, when I think Muslims can be the biggest bringers of change within their own communities. And that includes ex-Muslims too, because in the end, we are, you know, many of us have not left the community. So I think when Westerners scream Islamophobia at even genuine liberal criticism, that becomes part of the problem, and that fuels the far right. And then when the far right tries to demonize all Muslims, then that fuels that part of the left, which tries to say it's nothing to do with religion, it's nothing to do with Islam. And I always see in the Islam critical scene people calling out the left for empowering the far right, but nobody ever brings up the point that the far right also empowers what they used to call the regressive left, but a term that makes me cringe now because of who's co-opted it and how overused it's become.
Well, there's an understandable tendency on the left, I think, to want to refuse to engage with people who are at a sufficient level of bigotry. You know, like once a certain person becomes sufficiently bigoted, the left kind of just wants to go, well, that person is a racist, like I don't want to talk to them. And I do understand that, because you don't want to empower these people. This is the whole thing with like Milo Yiannopoulos and people like that. You don't want to empower them. I think that contributes to this like increasing polarization, because if you refuse to engage with someone on the opposite side, then, you know, they'll refuse to engage with you, and you get this kind of like drifting further and further apart, and then you do end up with both sides being fringe, and it's a really worrying trend across the West right now, this polarization. I think it's quite dangerous.
It's very scary. I often wonder, like, how far will it go? Like, because it seems to be everyone is getting more and more extreme. Do we end up at a place where you have to pick a side between jihadis and Nazis? Like, I really don't want to end up there.
Well, a lot of people are saying that with, you know, so like the Donald Trump thing, Bernie Sanders was originally going to run against him. And if you think about how completely far apart those two are, and yet they kind of are seen now as they would have had an equal chance of winning, which is bizarre because they're not even remotely similar. Like they're like opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet both of them had a good chance of winning. Like, doesn't that just show that half of the population is living in a different world to the other half, and that cannot be good?
How do you bridge that?
And even, and I saw among several voters that they said, well, now that Bernie Sanders is out of the race, I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I'll go and vote for Trump. So they wanted this protest vote, maybe perhaps. I'm not sure. And it didn't matter whether it was on the right or on the left. But they took an extreme position. And that's pretty scary.
Yeah, that burn the house down kind of attitude, shake things up.
I'm baffled by anyone who was going to vote for Bernie Sanders and then that didn't work out, so they voted for Donald Trump. Like, I mean,
it baffles the mind.
That is like saying I want to eat chocolate, but I can't have it, so I'll eat, something off the floor. I don't know. It's just a weird. It's just a weird like jump of like what? Why? How did you get from there to there? Like how? I don't understand. That's going to bring me a lot of hate saying that about Trump, isn't it?
I'm hoping that I have not many Trump supporter listeners left. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. So Sarah, how do you, since you're still connected to the religion, and it's funny, I being an ex-Muslim, talking to you, a convert, I'm like holding myself back from being like, why the whole time? Like, why would you convert to Islam? I don't want to be a douchebag, so I'm not going to put you on the spot like that.
My family were the same. Some of my family were the same because I have some atheists in my family, and then I went and converted to Islam, and there were two reactions. One was, you left Christianity. You were so close to becoming an atheist. You were so close. And we had a beer together and you were nearly there. And then, you went off into Islam. Like, what were you thinking? It's fine. I mean, they support me and everything is fine, but they just think it was a bit of a strange thing to do.
To be fair, sometimes Twitter atheists make me want to convert to Islam. So
yeah, I was saying that the other day. Like, I'm kind of tempted to just become like a hardcore Christian sometimes, just to be like, "Fuck you" to these guys,
Of course, nobody please take that literally. I don't actually mean that. Yeah. I was just making a joke, but yeah. So Sarah, how do we bridge this gap? How can people who are not Muslim connect with Muslims better? What are like some helpful attitudes to have after these kinds of attacks?
That's really tough. Because, you see many different possible reactions, like people wearing hijab, for example, that we mentioned before, which I don't think is particularly helpful.
Yeah.
Because I'm isolated where I am in Italy from British Muslims and other Muslims in general who share the same language as me, my approach has been connecting with people on a personal level, on a one-on-one level. And the problem is that takes a really long time. And if you don't have that many people doing it, that's going to take you forever. But if you can encourage more and more people not to make big, huge, grand gestures, but just to interact with the Muslims they see in their daily lives, and making those personal connections, eventually I would hope that you would have enough that when someone does say something extreme about Muslims, you can say, okay, well, these Muslims have done some pretty awful things that I disagree with, but I also know that there are other Muslims who don't do that. And so you have you can see from your own personal experience that they're not this huge monolithic group. I also think that there are many Muslims who share similar views to me, maybe not all of them, but maybe some of them, either related to secularism, against being supportive of ex-Muslims, and maybe they don't want to say it publicly because there's still maybe this fear of backlash for them. Because it's very easy for me to say a lot of these things that I say because I don't have a Muslim family who might disagree with me. I've got this kind of buffer that I'm protected by. I can say things about ex-Muslims and I don't have any fear about anyone attacking me. And that is something that a lot of people don't have. So it's very easy for me to say, I think these Muslims who agree with me, I think they should voice their opinion.
Yeah.
It's maybe quite easy for them.
I think
but I think somehow encouraging them to be more open in their views, even if it's just hinting at it at first and then slowly being more open, I think that would help. But I don't have a big plan for solving these things.
You know, I know that his speech drew a lot of ire, Riz Ahmed at the House of Commons.
Yeah,
but
I don't know
if you guys saw that speech. Well, I mean, especially on atheist Twitter, people didn't like it. But he said this thing about us having to create this new inclusive national story that includes Muslims and all types of people in this, what it means to be British and how we think of ourselves as a nation. And I think that would help us come together. You know, I think if your nationalism includes people of other faiths and stuff like that, then it's not that bad. Then it's okay. That's something that we can all take part in together. We can all be British patriots, whether we're Muslims or Christians or atheists. And I think that's a good thing. I don't understand really why people reacted so badly to it. I think they took it as him saying, if you don't give Muslims a space in Britain, then they'll, do terrorism or something. I don't think that's what he was saying.
Literally what one person said to me was, he's saying that if you don't give Muslim actors roles, we're gonna blow you up or something like that.
Yeah, come on. Like, how could you have listened to that speech and taken that away from it? I mean, could there be a clearer sign that you are just seeing what you want to see?
Yeah, I mean, all he was saying is that it was a call for diversity, I know, which is already, a hashtag triggering for some anti-PC folk, right? It's become this anti-SJWism is its own kind of SJWism where every small thing is a problem. Like just a call for diversity is so upsetting to you. I am really dismayed that is a thing, and that people would be surprised that I'd be supportive of that kind of thing. Like I've written 2 books about, 2 children's books about diversity and being accepting of diversity. Obviously, I'm going to support that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's becoming mainstream on the right as well to think of diversity as just this complete weakness that erodes society and
diversity
destroys it from within.
is code for white genocide. Is the meme, right?
And you know what? And it's like someone said on Twitter that people saying about, look at like Berlin and London and all of these places. Like, you're describing some of the most successful cities in the world, and they're the most diverse. It's just a fear of the other, isn't it? And it's just a retreat into racial identity almost. I think religious identity as well, but even that is a lot of the time drawn along racial lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think Riz Ahmed was saying something very important there when he said that we have to tell better stories. Right. Yeah. That we have, like, when young boys are seduced by this idea that they're going to go be like heroic fighters and go into battle and get these virgins or whatever that story is in their head, it's glamorous for them. So if you start telling a better story in the media, in pop culture, these things are really powerful tools. And if you start including Muslims in a non-stereotypical role, I think that's very powerful. And why not use the tools that we have at our disposal that are far more powerful than anything ISIS would have?
Yeah, that's true.
And that's why, I mean, I do write books like that for kids that do include, diverse ideas about what Muslims are and diverse pictures of what Pakistanis are, because I think that's a really good way to get the idea across.
Yeah, and I think as well that people really critique multiculturalism. They think it's like at the root of all of these things, and I understand the desire to be concerned about having people with vastly different cultures living together. But I think as long as you agree on some real ground rules and some real fundamentals, it's not so much of a problem, you know. No, I don't think people are generally like freaking out about like Indian culture in Britain. In fact, it's kind of become integrated into our own. Like we have, you know, curries that only exist in the UK, and we have so many Indian restaurants. But
yeah, but a few decades ago, and you would have heard a lot of the similar kind of fear-mongering and bigotry.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think as long as we agree on these basic things, you know, like gay rights and rights of women and stuff, that a lot of people on the right are ostensibly concerned about. A lot of the time that falls away as soon as, you know, their true colors show sooner or later, and they're not actually concerned about that. What they mean is they want to use that as an excuse to get rid of all the Muslims.
Yeah.
But, you know,
sure.
I think that there's no fundamental obstacle for people to hang on to their cultural traditions and stuff and live in another country, as long as people agree on some fundamentals like human rights and stuff like that. I don't see it as causing an issue.
Well, that's the thing, right? There's a type of multiculturalism that is, you know, just everything is equal and everything we must value, whether it's niqabs in the courtroom or burqas in the classroom, that kind of bullshit. You don't have to respect everything, but you can still be a very strong, diverse, multicultural society while laying down some ground rules that we don't compromise on, just like you said, like, you know, making our curriculums LGBT friendly or whatever, something that we're struggling with right now with religious populations in Canada as our schools try to make that happen in Ontario with the sex ed curriculum. But this is the thing. They get a bit scared by minorities screaming bigotry. And so we have to work around that. We have to stop being afraid of this accusation. When you know what you're doing is right, when you know that it is not bigoted to have a kid's book with a gay Pakistani in it, that's not bigoted. Whatever other Pakistanis are saying that this does not represent our culture, we do not have gays in our culture, and you're being a bigot, that's not, I mean, come on, surely we have the ability to distinguish between true bigotry and people just using bigotry as a cover, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, and even people in the Muslim world are like latching onto this idea of criticism of Islam or like trying to promote LGBT causes as some sort of like Western imperialism, cultural imperialism.
Yeah, I've seen that as well.
Yeah. So I think that's, you know, another thing, like just because someone calls something bigoted or calls you a racist or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are. Like it's something we shouldn't be quite so scared of. We should be aware of it. Absolutely. Like if someone says something you're doing is bigoted or like is offensive to them, then yeah, sure. Like at least consider it or try and find a way to make things more inclusive. But that doesn't mean compromising on base values. I don't think it ever means that. Right,
exactly. But see, the other reaction has been that there's been a group of people that are now saying basically everything that is accused of being racism or bigoted is that kind of nonsense when it's actual racism, right? So this kind of frivolous use of racism has provided a cover for actual racists or actual anti-Muslims to say, well, no, you're just doing that thing where you just say that something's bigoted just because we're rightfully criticizing your religion.
So this is something that we in the atheist community, I'm not even sure like I put myself in that camp quite anymore, but like
the conversion has begun.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, maybe I'll be a Buddhist or something. That's pretty unoffensive, right? But
I don't know. I can send you some threads.
I think I'll just call myself non-religious. That's usually quite unthreatening. But anyway, we've been warning about this for a while, and this is before the sort of Dave Rubin kind of like anti-SJW stuff started, the regressive left stuff, that if you keep calling everyone racist, if you keep calling everyone Islamophobic, bigoted or whatever, then what are you going to call people who are actually racist? Like those people will then just come in and say, oh, you know, the left, they just call everything racist. So
well,
like,
it's
you know,
true, and that's what's happened, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then it becomes meaningless.
Right, but that's what he does with SJW.
Yes, Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing on the right now as well.
Yeah.
SJW doesn't mean anything. It means you disagree with me, basically.
Yeah.
But, and we have this problem now of if someone calls Richard Spencer a racist, then people are like, oh, well, is he a racist? And he's like, no, well, the typical left using racism to silence my valid views or whatever,
Funny you should say that, because that's an actual thing that happened on a Dave Rubin interview with Lauren Southern. I think she did accuse the left of getting even criticism of Richard Spencer wrong. Like, oh, he's not a racist. See how wrong they are? Like, he's just a white nationalist. Like, oh gosh.
Yeah, you can use that. You can use that as a white nationalist, as a far right person, as a apologist of radical Islam. You can use these things to say, oh, well, people will call everyone that, so it's just meaningless now, so it doesn't apply to me. It becomes this devaluation of language, which is really toxic and really dangerous, because you just can't, suddenly you don't have a label for the people who are really dangerous anymore. Right. And they can just shrug off these labels because everyone else shrugs them off because they've been so abused.
Exactly.
Yeah, if they see everyone saying, oh, well, I'm not racist because this term doesn't mean anything anymore. Yeah, I would agree with that. So I get people who say that I'm anti-Muslim.
What?
Because of the things I say. And I have to remind them, like, I'm Muslim myself. I don't hate myself. But it doesn't happen as often. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen that sometimes someone will say to me, well, it's racist, or it's anti-Muslim. And of course, when someone says that to you, it's quite a dramatic thing, or at least for me anyway. So when it happens to me, I'm like, oh my goodness, was I racist? Was I anti-Muslim?
Well,
and I think, no, I wasn't.
You have a confusing identity to deal with, right? Because in the white ethno-state, you would still be welcome, or maybe not. I don't know. You might be welcome in the caliphate and the white ethno-state. So who are you really? Are you a jihadi or are you a Nazi?
Who knows? I had I saw an internet comment once that spoke about me, and it said, like, Sarah is like a madrasa experiment gone wrong, half Muslim, half atheist. And like this, it was bizarre, really bizarre. And I'm like working for atheists, but like anti-Muslim atheists, and by pretending to be Muslim or so. I don't know. It was very, very, very bizarre. But one thing I noticed about the attack in London was that the attacker was called British born.
Yeah.
Now, I share a lot of labels with this terrorist. I'm British.
Yeah.
I'm a convert. I'm an English teacher.
He was an English teacher as well?
For a time he was an English teacher. I read, I think in the Guardian.
He was. Yeah, he went to Saudi Arabia, I think, to do teach English for a while.
Dear.
So many things that are similar labels that I have. In fact, I think it was about 50% of my Twitter bio was the same as this man. And then, but the difference was that I'm always referred to as British. I've never been referred to as British born.
Right.
And at first, I thought that was quite odd. And then someone said, quite a few people said a counter argument to that maybe it's just they wanted to emphasize that he wasn't a refugee.
Yeah, I think if you...
there were a lot of people speaking about that, saying, like, for example, Tommy Robinson saying, it must be someone who's come over here, on boat, etc., and dehumanizing refugees and things. But... So I thought that was quite interesting, because I've never been referred to as British born. I'm always British, because I can't hide my whiteness.
Yeah. But I think the refugee point is probably what they're trying to get across. Like if you...
Yeah. So I think maybe I overreacted when I first saw it, and I thought,
I had the same reaction that you did. When you just said British born, I was like, oh, that's bad. And then when you said counter argument, I was like, oh no, I get it now.
I think even people who like to think of themselves as quite balanced nowadays we tend to see racism everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or read into things.
This is why I don't like the term Islamophobia, because it conflates bigotry towards Muslims with criticism of Islam. Do you think that's fair, Sarah?
I would say that's fair, because I have criticism of Islam. Mm-hmm. And I certainly don't want to be called Islamophobic, because I'm a Muslim myself, and I'm criticizing my own group, if you like.
Right.
But just because I'm part of the group doesn't mean I'm somehow more, I have more authority to criticize it than someone outside who's also affected by by this group, or who once was a member of this group.
Yeah.
So I would say that's fair, and I try now to use the term anti-Muslim bigotry or anti-Muslim hate rather than Islamophobia, and I will use that until that loses meaning, basically, and then we have to find another term for it. But
well, I think it's so precise. It's hard to misuse that. Like, I don't think you can use that in the case of criticism of Islam. Like, it's not anti-Muslim bigotry to say, Islam sometimes doesn't appear to be great religion for women in some ways. How is that anti-Muslim? It's anti-Islam maybe, but there are some clear verses that you can point to that are pretty anti-woman. So
yeah, it's another tactic for silencing people speaking about issues. Like, the Russians have started calling things Russophobia.
Yeah, I saw that.
This is a tactic that it can be applied in a lot of different contexts. You just say that something is something phobic, and then you're, if you say it, then you're a racist. It's kind of it's a way to. I don't think everyone uses it to silence debate deliberately. Don't get me wrong.
No, some people actually use it to mean anti-Muslim bigotry, but it's just a term that's bad. So I think it can be replaced. Yeah, they may not realize it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I saw, there's a hashtag trending today about wanting to hang a Pakistani blogger for blasphemy. Yeah. And I saw a guy using that in the hashtag saying, Islamophobic atheists are jumping in to defend this guy that should be hanged. It's like, what?
What? No way.
Yeah.
Really?
It's like, really, is it Islamophobia to defend someone from hanging for blasphemy?
That is.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But just to wrap things up now, let's just close off with maybe like an attitude that's unhelpful and an attitude that's helpful going forward, just so that people can be more aware of what kind of things can bring us together and what kinds of things are just counterproductive when tackling these types of things.
There was a new one that I saw. Maybe it's not entirely new, but there was this video shared around from this journalist, Simon Jenkins, who talked about basically how the BBC was complicit in aiding and abetting the terrorists, because basically they covered it as a terrorist attack rather than just an ordinary crime, and he was saying that the coverage is disproportionate in terrorism, and we're helping the terrorists by doing that. And I really thought that was really strange, and I saw a lot of people share that. I don't know if you guys did, but a lot of people shared that. I did. Yeah, and they agreed with it, and I found it very strange. I found it a very strange attitude to basically be like, if you cover this too much, then you're helping terrorism. I think, if someone runs down a bunch of people in the middle of London and stabs a policeman, that is top news.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
And also the fact that it's, things are only news because they're not really that common as well.
Yes, exactly,
And thankfully in London and in the UK, terrorism isn't that common. I mean, it is quite a... We've had several important incidents and significant incidents, but we haven't had that many. And I think a lot have been stopped as well.
Yes.
So, that's what you don't hear about. So people think
exactly. The successes we don't hear about when they've managed to apprehend someone before they do anything.
Yeah.
And it is significant when you have a terrorist attack, and it would be, if it weren't being covered and if it weren't the top story, I would be very concerned that it's been normalized and we don't care about it anymore. We've just, that just happens in the UK now.
Yeah, well, it's either that or the government is deliberately trying to cover it up, which I don't think is better.
Yeah. What about this attitude of like conflating terrorist attack with only Islamic terrorist attacks? So I heard some people talk about how this is the first terrorist attack since Lee Rigby. Can you explain the Lee Rigby incident, one of you, just for listeners? So two Muslim guys in a car ran over Lee Rigby, who's a soldier, and attacked him with a machete. This is just in the middle of broad daylight. Sorry?
How many years ago was it now?
I'm not sure actually. Maybe
I can't remember.
2013, maybe. I'm not sure. It was a little while ago now. But and I think what you're getting at, Iona, is that this wasn't the most recent terrorist attack. For a start, we had Thomas Mayer shoot Joe Cox in broad daylight, which was that. I don't want to compare and contrast terrorist attacks, but that was very deeply shocking, I think, to a lot of people. I think that really resonated.
And what was that? Can you explain that incident too, just in case there are some listeners that don't know what that incident is?
So Thomas Mayer was a far right. He'd been influenced by a bunch of far right groups. He'd been on forums and stuff like that. And Joe Cox was kind of like a pro-immigration member of parliament, and he basically shot her and stabbed her in broad daylight and killed her
while screaming Britain first.
It was a clear. I mean, it was the clearest cut case of right-wing terrorism you could see.
And he also repeated that in court, if I remember rightly. He also said something like "death to infidels" or something. No, death to infidels. What was it he said in court? He said something that made it very, very clear that this was, a terrorist attack. And that he had political motivation for this, that he wanted to bring about some kind of political end and stop. I think he might have also been influenced by sort of the term white genocide as well. I'm pretty sure he was influenced by different radical far-right groups.
And recently there was a guy in the States who traveled, I forget to where, but just to kill randomly black men, he said, who, he was afraid were like sleeping with white women or something like that. I'll link the story, but this got very little coverage. And some guy replied to one of my comments in a thread of comments where I was like, it was another Riz Ahmed tweet where he said, Riz Ahmed is a British actor, where he said, I hope that we will pull together and not pull further apart, or something like that. And I said something like, I don't know, solidarity, or I hope so, or something like that. And some person responded with, well, we can't do that if, Muslims or these people or something like, I forget the exact words, are trying to tear us apart all the time or attacking us all the time. And I was like, well, it's not just one party. Let's not forget that the far right also is very divisive, and that everyone needs to pull together. And someone then responded to that and was like, oh yeah, well, when was the last time a white nationalist killed an innocent man in the street?
Very recently.
And I was
you were like yesterday.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah,
absolutely. The ignorance around it is ridiculous. And you know what? I'm not going to pretend that far-right terrorism is as bad as jihadism.
No, not at all. You don't have to take it to that level.
Some of them, I mean, there's been some bad ones, though. I mean, Anders Breivik killed 68 people in one day.
Right, and the Quebec mosque shooting just happened very recently.
Mosque shooting, that happened. There was this meme going around a little while ago of, like, right-wing terrorism is a bigger threat in the US. It's killed more people than jihadism. That isn't true. It was true for a short amount of time in like June 2015. I think there was like 48 people had been killed by right-wingers and 26 by jihadists, but that was before San Bernardino and Orlando and stuff. So it's not true anymore, but it still doesn't mean that we should just ignore
exactly.
I mean, 48 people being killed by right-wingers.
You don't have to downplay that jihadism is a problem. You don't have to deny that, far-right ideology is a problem. We can just acknowledge that both are, and they're becoming bigger problems, and they feed off of each other. Obviously, nothing compares to ISIS and Islamism. I have to say this, with every single thing I say, just to satisfy the "but what about Islam" people. Like, I remember posting a picture of my Christmas tree, which had a bunch of bats on it around Christmas, and some guy was like, I don't know, he took it personally as some insult to Christianity, right? Yeah, he's like, oh, it must be nice to be able to insult Christianity when you can't do something like that for Islam. And I'm
wasn't there something when you two were having a conversation as well, and some guy like jumped in?
Oh yeah, me and Sarah were talking about hosting an interfaith event with Satanists possibly, and she was responding really well, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, there's a Muslim person who organizes interfaith events, and if she can include Satanists, that could be legendary. That could be progress. And we're having this conversation.
I remember that because it was very interesting you'd asked me, because no one had ever asked me that question before.
Yeah, and then some dude comes in.
So it was an interesting discussion.
Yeah, he was like, but what about Islam? Like, Islam is so much worse. Because you were kind of hesitant because you didn't really know what Satanism was. And
exactly. I didn't know enough. And also I think as my background as a Christian, I still have an automatic distrust. Like, oh my goodness, but a Satanist. Oh no, I can't. Oh no, couldn't possibly. So that was really fascinating. But I often get someone coming in and saying, what about Islam? Like, Islam is much worse. Yeah, but you... the one I get a lot is by wearing hijab, you are like enabling all of this terrorism.
All of the terrorism.
You're enabling it.
My.
Wow, that is a lot of power you had, Sarah.
I didn't realize I had that much
Just take it off and all of this would be solved.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
Why did we spend so long discussing what ways we can use to tackle this when all you have to do is take your hijab off? Why didn't you tell us this?
I also would clear my mind, because a lot of people say, hijab, I obviously have impaired judgment. So, I mean, I took off my hijab for this interview. Thank goodness, it was an audio. I didn't have to wear it. And then,
are you immodest right now?
Well, I don't want to say, but I did brush my teeth before the interview.
Some guy is getting really excited that your hair is showing.
Yeah, definitely. Even over audio, you can hear it. But anyway, to circle back around to your question, I know about bad reactions to attacks and good reactions to attacks. I think the bad ones for me are obviously the anti-Muslim bigotry. That's bad. Talking about incompatibility of cultures and stuff like that, especially when London has a Muslim mayor, just seems ridiculous to me.
And he's a pretty good mayor from what I see. Like, he's on top of things.
I like him.
He's spoken out about anti-Semitism and,
Yeah, I think that was the first thing he did when he took office, actually, I think, was go to an event about anti-Semitism.
It's so good for him to visibly do this as a Muslim mayor. So that I'm really pleased to see that.
And he does get criticism from Muslims, because
he does. Yeah.
Think, he's not. Is he really Muslim?
Oh, of course.
And so you do get people saying silly criticism on all sides.
Yeah.
But no, I think he's doing a pretty good job. I mean, I can't remember. He said something recently that I thought, I don't really like what he said. But I mean, I think if you had a mayor and you agreed with everything,
that would be weird.
That would be disturbing.
That doesn't happen, really.
No, exactly. No, it's doing a pretty good job, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so
that's one, and the others would be kind of we touched on briefly, like the kind of whataboutery with like foreign policy, like we brought this on ourselves, and the media coverage we're helping terrorism, and again the nothing to do with Islam thing I think isn't helpful. The good things are the Andrew Neil, like saying unity, solidarity, courage,
and fuck you Islamists.
And fuck you Islamists, yeah, exactly. And some honest discussions of the problems of extremism in Britain. There's nothing wrong with that. And denouncing anyone who jumps in, like Tommy Robinson, to use it to fuel like hate against immigrants when immigrants didn't have anything to do with it. And
and he was so sure in that interview. I don't have my head up my ass. That's why I know this was a foreign attack. And you're going to import a culture. His co-host was saying then you're going to get this. This is a culture of terrorism. And
there are over 1 million Muslims that live in London, and this was one guy.
And he was not imported.
No, he was a British-born citizen.
Yeah.
I think
British-born. Yeah, so I think British people have to own that they have their own brand of radicalization that's not foreign. It's very, very British.
Yeah, and it's very particular. I think you were touching on before how British Islam is, or some forms of British Islam are very different to others, to in America, for example. And I think that's true. British Islam has taken on its own flavor, if you like, and it manifests in different ways. And you could have this, sort of strict extreme form, and you can also have Muslims who are more progressive and more liberal and have different, it's influenced by the country that it's in. And I don't think you can really say that British Islam is you cannot separate it from Britain now, because it's so deeply embedded.
Yeah.
Especially if you've been, you were born in Britain and you've been raised in British education system, with British television, with British people, etc. And
I think one good thing
influence your way of thinking and your faith
that Britain is doing really well now is the TV shows that they have. Like, they have such great documentaries, like what was it, Muslim drag queens, and they had what was the one with the house where like a reality show where they had like different types of Muslims live together, which many Muslims were angry about. But
yeah, that was fascinating.
I thought it was fantastic. Like, this is how you normalize Muslims. This is how you start discussions and show the diversity. That program really showed all the way from the very extreme, which I thought one of the dudes was really, really extreme. I don't even know if he should have been allowed onto TV, but
I think it was called Muslims Like Us.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. And now I'm seeing another hashtag. I haven't seen the show, but it's called Very British Muslims or something.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. I haven't seen the documentary, but I've heard about it.
But yeah, I think these are really good ways to start these conversations, right? To show that Muslims can range in religiosity, to show that there can be Muslim drag queens. These are such good ways to do it. And of course, that's going to piss off the conservative Muslims. So be it. I think you need to piss off some conservative Muslims.
Probably one of the best things that happened for British Muslims in recent times is Nadia Hussein winning the Great British Bake Off.
Right, I keep hearing about that.
Yeah, visible hijabi winning basically what is a British institution. I think people actually met the Queen and everything.
Yeah,
she baked for the Queen. She was trusted with baking a cake for the Queen.
Exactly. And that
Muslim
is great.
being trusted with serving food to royalty is quite something.
Yeah, that's
This is what Riz Ahmed meant, right? He means creating these stories. This is a story. She's a success story of a person who is both British and visibly Muslim, and I think that's
inclusivity, right? And that's not about glorifying the hijab. That's something that I try to stress the difference. Exactly. If you just show hijabis like just matter of fact as normal people, I think that's fine. But people tend to conflate that. So they kind of get angry about just any visual representation of hijabis as if it's some kind of glorification or romanticizing of the modesty concept when it's not. And I think that hijabis already exist among us, so they should be portrayed in our stories. But
absolutely.
They should not be championed as this fantastic, modest woman. That's the problem. That's the problem that people need to separate. I think when they talk about things like modest revolution or, it being a tool of empowerment, just do not make the hijab the center of it. Like that Nike creating the athletic hijabs. I didn't see the problem with it because hijabis exist. And if they want to exercise, why not create a product for them to exercise in with breathable cloth?
I agree.
But
there are many things you can criticize about big companies cashing in on this halal Muslim friendly industry that's worth billions of dollars, and that's fine.
There's Muslim sex shops which make no sense to me. They have the same. Yeah, I was interviewed for an article about that. Like last year, I'll send you guys a link. But yeah, they have the same sex toys, the exact same things. It's just.
But it's called halal or something.
It's just called the Muslim sex shop. Bizarre. I don't know why.
That's bizarre. Having their own separate.
Like these butt plugs are Muslim. These butt plugs are very Islamic. Like
halal butt plugs. Is that going to be a hashtag after this?
Yeah, tweet at us halal butt plugs if you're still listening. But yeah. So the Nike hijab thing, you can criticize that, but the company's cashing in on this stuff. But that's a criticism of really capitalism being icky, right? And just cashing in on every little thing that it possibly can.
I sort of feel like if you arrived at the point you're being exploited by a company in that way, you've kind of arrived. It's like being on TV, being on trash TV in the UK. I mean, if you're not being on a documentary that's like an elevated, high culture documentary. If you're just in the everyday, daily TV, even bad TV, then that's it's normal, isn't it?
Maybe we could westernize the hijab so much that the Iranians make all their women take it off, and the Saudi Arabians make them all. They're just like, this is a symbol of Western capitalism.
This is a symbol of Britain. All these women wearing this hijab with a British flag and a Nike symbol.
Yeah. Well, to some extent, I mean, I think the hijab is better reclaimed than the niqab never can be, unless it's, I don't know, reclaimed in some sort of BDSM fetish environment. That's possible. Yeah. But the hijab, I mean, it's, appearing in Playboy. It's pissing off a lot of conservative Muslims as well. So it's a complicated thing. It's still a symbol of modesty, because majority of women who have to wear it, and I'm counting the whole world, do not get a choice. And that's the problem, right? It's not just a scarf like you'd wear in the winter. It's something that holds a meaning. And until it keeps holding that meaning, people will keep criticizing it. But what I want to stress is the difference between providing access to women who otherwise may not get it. Like even the burkini, I'm not for modest swimsuits, but I don't see the problem with creating a modest swimsuit. And, like if you're not going to get to go to the beach otherwise.
Yeah, then I think it's really so. Can I tell you about my burkini?
Yeah, please do. I tried to get you on my burkini panel, but you were, I don't know, on holiday those days.
Yeah, so maybe I was on holiday wearing my burkini. So I bought this thing because I wanted to go to the beach. And I don't really like the beach. I don't like the sun. So bikini for me is perfect because I'm just really pale. Okay. So I wanted to have this bikini so I wouldn't burn in the sun, and I'd be covered as well because I didn't want to wear, normal clothes. So bought it. I made a really bad judgment on the color because I went for black and yellow. So I look like a giant bumblebee.
Is it striped?
It's not striped, but I look like a big bumblebee, or a wasp. I don't look good. It's not flattering. I know it's not flattering. It looks like a swimsuit, like a wow.
You're not going to arouse any lust.
Yeah. I wasn't going for a flattering look, but it's really comfy, and I could swim, and I haven't been swimming in years. So I went swimming in it. I went to an Italian swimming pool, and I'm not a very good swimmer, so I was a bit self-conscious anyway. And then I have this yellow and black thing that makes me look like an insect. And then I went into the swimming pool, and everyone was wearing swimming caps, and obviously a swimming costume. And I got into the water, and a lifeguard came over to me, and he said, "I'm afraid you're not allowed to wear that in here."
Oh.
And I said, "Oh, why? Why can't I wear this in here?" And he said, "Oh, well, it's not regulation because it's not hygienic." And I said, well, first I got upset because whenever there's any confrontation, I cry.
Oh, no.
So I'm really not presenting myself. It's awful because now everyone's looking at me. It's like this giant crying, oppressed bumblebee. It was such a tragic sight. And I'm not really doing my part to defend the idea that women are, can do anything, because I'm just crying. And I'm saying why can't I wear this? Why isn't it hygienic? Because the whole point of being in the swimming pool was covering your hair.
Yeah. And it's, the ones that showed in France, they looked a lot like the wetsuits, right? So
yeah, exactly. So I couldn't understand why. And I think this man was really nervous about me wearing this and he'd never seen anyone wearing one before. And he just wasn't sure how to react. And then, of course, I start crying, and then everyone's looking at me. And he backed off because he thought, oh, my goodness, I don't want to be the one who, causes a scene with this poor girl who's... But the thing for me was that wearing it gave me an opportunity to go swimming where I might not have gone otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think that's better than having, just women-only sessions for swimming and stuff, which I think there's a place for that, because I know many women who aren't Muslim who also like going to women-only sessions, and that's fine. But I think this provides the opportunity to go swimming for many people, to do sport. And although, you could think that the hijab is not empowering, and you could have a very good argument for that, I think being able to go out and do sport is empowering.
Right, exactly.
I do. Or not, it doesn't really matter. You're getting out. And maybe, if someone is being oppressed by someone, or they're being forced to wear hijab, maybe this one thing is something that gives them an opportunity to do something that they want to do. And maybe that will lead to something else. And you can see many Muslim women now coming up in professional sport even as well.
I just wish they didn't make that about the hijab. It's great that they are, but that fencer in the Olympics, they only celebrated her because of her hijab, while ignoring the other Muslim woman who was running in a tank top and shorts, right? So that's the problem. And that's what people don't understand, the subtlety.
The hero and the other isn't.
Yes. It has to be opposed when it's about the glorification of the hijab. But you don't have to oppose the hijab just, in every visual representation of it. I do understand with the Nike thing, there was a bit of confusion. Like, their line is called Nike Pro. So the hashtag became Nike Pro Hijab. And I don't think necessarily it meant their pro hijab. It's just their Nike Pro line. Yeah. And it's someone really bad in marketing, didn't think that through. So
I didn't know about that. That's interesting.
Yeah. But so these are the subtleties. If people could recognize some nuance, this discussion could be so much better, right? There doesn't need to be denial. There doesn't need to be projection on everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's it. So maybe, Jason, you can leave us with some thoughts on how London is at the time being, how it is, like what the feel is of the city, what it was like yesterday when you were at work.
Sure, yeah. I mean, to be honest, so I'm on a chat app called Slack with work. So I was in communication with them on the day that it happened. And someone just posted the article in the chat channel, and then basically no one said anything about it other than that. It was just like a normal news story that's happened. So people weren't cowed, people weren't panicking. And when I went on Friday, honestly, if I didn't know there had been an attack, I wouldn't have known. There was no crazy police presence. People weren't looking all terrified and looking around at anyone with brown skin or anything like that. It was fine. There was no difference. And London is resilient, and London carries on. So I don't think it has knocked us quite as much as Katie Hopkins would like you to believe.
Well, that's great. I'm glad London is resilient, and things like that really can't, they can't scare us. We have to keep going on. Otherwise, we let them win, right? We can't let them think that they have scared us.
Yeah, well, I mean, they can scare us, but so what? It's not going to change anything about how we live our lives. I'm still going to get on the tube, and I'm not going to be paranoid about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, what did Andrew Neil say? They can hurt us, and sometimes it's more than we can bear, but they'll never defeat us. And I think that is true. Sounds a bit dramatic coming out of my mouth, but,
Guys, thank you so much for joining me and giving me your time and your valuable perspectives. I think it was a great discussion. We covered a lot.
Yeah, it was really good to talk to you again and be on. Yeah. And talk to you as well, Sarah.
Oh, thank you. It was lovely to get to know your opinions as well. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me on.
Awesome, guys. Take care. I'll see you out there on Twitter.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Polite Conversations. You can support this podcast by sharing the shit out of it, making some noise about it, or contributing via Patreon. Patreon.com/Nice Mangoes. No E in mangoes. Also, you can follow me on Twitter @Nice Mangoes. If you want to make a one-time donation instead of a monthly Patreon one, you can do so via PayPal. nicemangoes.blog@gmail.com. Remember, no E in mangoes. If you've got an interesting story and would potentially like to be a guest, you can email me there too. A special thanks to Dylan Beck for theme music, sound, and production help.